I'll be honest, I don't feel too great today, so we're gonna leave it at a very short topic and see how far that goes. And what we're talking about is to continue the theme of the last few episodes, kind of a pattern. Even though I don't see it discussed as such, I feel like it could fit the bill. We're talking about comments in general. And comments in C# can look very different depending on what you need. Let's cover the basic first. Comments are basically whenever you put 2 forward slashes in the code and they're not escaped as part of a string or something, everything that follows after these 2 slashes is just completely ignored by the compiler. You see it in the source code, but once the compiler starts working, it's gonna completely ignore everything in here. Next line, I can actually use something, so I can put something in front. That line, hello. But the rest of the line is ignored. Put something before then, before, after. So all no problem. White space, no white space, whatever I want. Multiple comments in different rows, perfectly fine. Just always the rest of the line is ignored. Right, standard stuff. Just to cover the basics. Less common, but still very useful in many cases, is this type of comment. It has a fixed start and a fixed end. And we can use that to just have something in multiple lines, like these asterisks. They don't really matter. Let's reduce it to the simplest form of just start and end pattern. Something in between. And I can have this after my code or in front. Like I can put this on one line, it's just in between. And honestly, I think it's probably gonna work if I put that in here. Yeah. So with that, I can make some really, really ugly things that you should not do, but it's possible. And usually it's used if you have several lines of comments. If you have to really write down some text, you sometimes see that at the beginning of your file, some lines of documentation basically telling you what this line is, or maybe copyright issues, licensing deals and whatnot. A lot of interesting stuff. So this is a more advanced comment, but less common again. Usually you would just 2 slashes and that's it. Now how would you use these comments? The typical wisdom you will learn, and that I totally agree with, I'm not telling you any hot takes here or changing anything of that. Comments itself are useful, but you should use them sparingly. There are a lot of situations where you might be tempted to use a comment where the alternative would be better. So let's make an example. Oh yeah, I'm gonna make an array and numbers equals, I don't know, 1, 4. What is not, oh yeah, numlock. Okay, that's better. It's still not, why is it? For some reason it's removing numlock. Weird, did I hit something off kilter? Oh, whatever. I have a numbers array. And sum equals 0, and then or int e equals 0, I is less than numbers.length, and plus I, and then sum plus, yep, like that, and that. Seems good. So some very simple code. Now bad comment would be sum up the values in the array. This is a bad comment because I as a programmer that hasn't developed this, I totally see this for the very first time. I have to read this now, because there might be something important for me to know. Like I see there's an array and I have a sum, and then I'm doing something in a loop, and there's this text that I have to read. And now I wasted time reading this one sentence that I kind of guessed already. Just by looking at the code, you see a for loop and you see a sum, and just those two alone would give you a 90% accurate guess on what's going on here. Because it's very simple, very common code. This comment adds nothing and actually detracts, because it wastes my time. Otherwise, it's nothing bad, and there might actually be a reason why this comment is here, for good reason. See, something that you can do with comments is make little reminders to yourself while developing. To do sum up the values. So maybe I haven't implemented that. Maybe there's a piece of code that I have to implement later, but it's not relevant for the overall logic. It's just something tedious to do that I still have to do, but the code works for now and I'm focusing on the more important tasks. And I'm just leaving a reminder that I have to do something. And you can see this comment doesn't look like before. The syntax highlighting is reacting to this to-do in front. If you can do that depends on your IDE or the tooling you use in general. For me, there is, first of all, a different highlighting for these types of comments. Plus, I have this to-do explorer. I have a little window that just sums up wherever I have some to-do written in the comments. So I can always keep track of where do I have still some work left. And instead of writing that down somewhere separately, I have it right in my code where I need it, which can be quite useful. Though, once you have dozens or so of to-dos, it becomes a bit less obvious what you have to do where, and you need to have some external system to keep track of it anyway. But for smaller work tasks, this is quite useful. This thing in the bottom, it also tracks other things. So let's see, while testing, I have, for example, the bug not working, or bug found weird case with 0. Like, say I have some more code. And why is it not reacting to my bug? Ah, okay, forgot the colon. I have a different notification for I have a bug. So maybe while debugging, testing, I find something that I annotate as, okay, something is weird here, something doesn't work right. Not my focus right now. I have another issue I have to solve that I'm actively trying to solve or fix. And while doing it, I found this. And I'm just putting annotation down for me as a reminder, hey, I found something, but I don't have time to take care of it right now. But this is just a very quick way to not forget it. So in those cases, your tooling might be able to react to this. Just to complete this new. So for me, that also reacts to not implemented exceptions. You can see it's the same highlight, because it's basically a to-do. Just a matter of, hey, you haven't implemented anything here. So that's a case where to-do these comments actually have some deeper function that is evaluated externally. But something that can happen in those cases, of course, you forget to remove them. I implement the feature, I get the for loop again. Actually, let's sort this out. Numbers 4. Yeah, whatever. Like so. And I just forget to delete the comment, and now the comment is still in here. And the comment simply describes what my code is. So it's not something that shows they're a newbie programmer. It just means they were a bit sloppy with cleanup. Can happen. So there might be legitimate reasons why some bad comments appear in otherwise good code by experienced developers. So if you have some tooling, that of course is less likely to happen, since your tooling will notify you of, hey, you forgot to remove it. Now, something else you can comment on that would actually be useful is, for example, if for some reason my sum already starts at this first element. We don't go into detail why. There might be a good reason for that. If you think of a bit more complex programs, maybe that's part of my optimization. Maybe I don't have simple numbers, maybe there's something more complex here, and instead of loading the value again from the array, from wherever I get these, maybe not an array, I save some time and reuse an item I already have. In which case I have to start at 1. Well, let's fix this. I don't like this. That's more my style. So in that case, you start at position 1. And if you're not sure what this program does exactly, and if you just have the cursory glance at it, the same I mentioned earlier, I see the 4, I see the sum, you might be inclined to think, hey, there's a bug here. Because this looks all pretty standard, especially this part, except for this one. So in those cases, you might want to add a comment, hey, sum already as item. So this would be the 10% where it's not the default case, and you just add a comment that legitimately tells another programmer that something is different here. You should pay attention. They might otherwise flag this as an error because they don't consider that sum might be initialized differently. Again, simple example, not the best example, but the comment in this case has just the meaning of this code is different from the standard pattern in a very subtle way, and I need to inform the people that read it of the slight change so they don't go assuming I made a mistake, which they would fix by adding a 0, and then suddenly everything breaks. So just to let them know, this is not an error, even though that looks out of place. This is intentional. A comment might also be used to highlight something completely different. So, cool. Let's say we make this, and yeah, like that. Actually, I'm curious what this would look like. Let's quickly run the code. What is actually the value? It's a 3. Cute. So, yeah, no, that makes sense. I should probably, if I do this, go for some... That's better. Yeah, that looks more correct. So I'm fiddling around with the bits. I'm using the second to least significant bit, bit 1 or 2 depending on how you count it. And I just arrange these in a sequence for every single value in my array, and that combined is evaluated as a new value. And then maybe result value. Like, it's not really clear what this is. It's not just a sum anymore, it's something odd. I'm doing some bit operations here, and this is not obvious anymore. What am I doing here? And again, a bad example of my comment would be take the second to last, not take the second smallest bit and arrange them in a number or something like that. Bad comment because I'm just iterating what my code does. Repairing checksum, maybe something like that. Would be more useful. I'm not explaining what I'm doing, I'm explaining what the goal of what I'm doing is. What is the end result of this? What is it supposed to do? What algorithm is this? What could I look up for that? Or what? Just having the idea of what the point of this code is more helpful than knowing what the code does, because the best explanation for what the code does is the code itself. I can read it, I know what it's doing here. It just doesn't make too much sense to me. Like, what's the purpose of that result value? And even then, these comments don't always make a lot of sense because they take time to read. They distract. You see a comment and you know, okay, something is off. I have to stop just glancing over the code. I have to actually pay attention now and read this comment and maybe look deeper into the code. Calling this just checksum would be a lot clearer. Because now I can read the code and I see, oh, it's about a checksum. I'm doing some algorithm here that I don't really have to look at. I don't really care. I know this whole thing is just to create a checksum and I'm happy about that. I don't need a comment to tell me that. Again, very simple example, but the same principle holds true for method calls or classes, whatever. Good naming makes comments kind of pointless. If your code is well structured, mostly if it's well named, if everything has a good explanatory name, then it should be pretty obvious what it's doing. There are exceptions, of course, and for those, comments are still useful. We could, for example, include so and so checksum, just describing what specific type of checksum I'm using or algorithm I'm using. Maybe even with a URL to link to where you got it from or where it's described in detail. Those are still useful comments. Something that's actually providing new information that could not be derived directly from code. Maybe because it's too vast of information. Or maybe because the code itself makes something look complicated even though the basic idea is very easy understood, or you only need an abstract understanding of it. So you have a shortcut in form of a comment that tells you, go here, it's this name, look that up. Maybe it also refers to some internal documentation. Who knows? So those are cases where comments are totally justified. Providing complete new information that is important when you work with the code, either to understand if the code is working correctly or to understand how to modify it to fix it. Providing information about the code of, I chose this algorithm at this point because it has this performance impact and these other considerations that went into it. That's just additional information that's totally useless to whoever's working on the code. That's still useful for internal documentation. Like later on you want to point a finger at and okay, why did we choose this algorithm back then? It causes us issues right now. And nobody here remembers why specifically this one and what complications we might have if we switch to a different algorithm. Why did we choose this one? And having some separate documentation about that, where you just list it down, hey, we did this and this and this, and we make those choices because of that. Cool. And in those specific cases, if there were big decisions, you could add a comment in your code referencing that internal documentation. Hey, this is that algorithm. Check this internal documentation to see the details. Bam, done. I read the code and I know exactly what's going on. The code itself is self-explanatory. The comment tells me the name I have to look for if I want to verify if the algorithm is correct. And I have a link to an internal document that tells me why that algorithm was chosen and if there are any alternatives that we have to consider in the future. Basic comments. There's a more complicated use for comments, and similar to my to-do earlier, it is when you want to add additional automated, how do I say this? If you want to have automated system derive meaning from your comments, if you don't want the comments to just be text in your source code that's completely ignored by anyone that's not a human reading it. And that happens using special formatting. So I'm gonna do a comment, but now I'm gonna add a third slash. And you will see that I have some autocomplete that will add some stuff to it. This is still a comment. Keep in mind, this is still 2 slashes in front. But just like how my to-do after the 2 slashes made this be a special type of comment, this third slash in front also makes it a special type of comment. Well, that plus the entire block of 3 slash comments is right in front of a method. These blocks of comments can be evaluated by your IDE or whatever tool you have and be used as documentation for describing what your code does from other parts in your code where you can see the code directly. Or if you share your code with other people through a library instead of source code, you can include a special document that contains basically these comments that actually explain what your code does. And those are special cases where a comment is actually used to describe what you're doing, and it's useful still. So let's maybe just show some examples. Let's make a new class. Actually, no, let's make this a bit more obvious. Let's make a new class first and an external file. Game, let's make it public. Set public, not public. And let's make it a private constructor. Time span, frame delay. This is gonna make sense in a moment. Just and public. Like let's go for double. Public frame rate. Let's see, 1 divided by frame delay dot seconds. Oh, total seconds. That should be it. And now we're gonna add a constructor method. Public game create game instance, and yes. And let's see, times. Okay, let's first make an if FPS is less than 1. An argument exception. Needs at least one frame per second. Name of FPS. So And if it's bigger, then we're gonna take time span from seconds, and that's gonna be 1 divided by yes, 1 double delay, and we're gonna return new game, delay. Okay, sample code is ready. I'm my main method. I'm creating. I forgot to make a static. That's better. Game.create game instance, 60 FPS. Game instance. So I'm creating new game instance with a frame rate of 16 point something, because floating point operations, of course. Only we have about 16 milliseconds per frame, which is correct. But yeah, floating point inaccuracies, it's not quite 60 frames per second. Close enough. Now let's imagine that this is not simply a different file, but a completely different library that I've just imported through a Nugget package or made a reference to a DLL file somewhere. I don't have access to this source code. I mean, often you do have, especially if it's your own system, but in many cases you don't have access to the source code, and you'd have no idea how to look into this. How does this code actually work? How do I use this? All I know is, okay, we have a game class and we have this constructor method, this factory method, I guess, because it's the only interface we have from game directly. And from that we get an instance of game which offers us frame rate. And sure, if you work with the debugger and reflections, you can sort of piece together what the internal looks like. So we can figure out that it has internally a frame delay field. That's just about it. You don't really know the details. It's a black box. To actively use this, you want some documentation. You want someone to tell you, how does it work? How do I use this? What do I have to look out for? And one very direct and easy way to do that is by adding our special 3/ comment blocks. So, for example, I can put that above the class definition. Main class for managing active game sessions. Maybe that. And by providing the special comment right above the game, I can now, from wherever I have access to either the source code or a special file we'll talk about in a minute, I'm able to look up this comment based on my class from my IDE. So I have to just hover over this with my mouse, and I know you can see it right now because that's how the recording works. So let me just gonna... No, that's not... That's better. You should see it now. That's a quick screenshot. This is what I see when I hover over game specifically. This little pop-up mix-up that shows me the summary. Just a description. Hey, this is the class game from namespace do.erase, and that's the description what this class is. Main class for managing active game sessions. And in my case, I do have something more. Let me also make a screenshot of that. That comes through an extension that gives me a slightly more detailed view, this little window here, but also from game. And we can use these to give some context to different publicly visible classes and properties and methods. So the amount of frames per second is game session targets. So if I hover over frame rate, it's difficult to make this. Okay. That's what I get. I get a full explanation of what this property is by just hovering over it. Let's make this also happen for the factory method. Now, when I target the factory method here, the default is not just the summary that you can see here. The autocomplete will also add 2 more, actually 3 more. And we'll look at what they do. First, let's fill in the summary. Create game instance creates a new game session. Let's put it like that. It's a new game session. And I can, let's make a screenshot, hover over it, and you see something new here. You see my summary, the explanation of what this is, the description, but you see exceptions. And listed in here is argument exception. Because I've added a special tag here for exceptions, specifically argument exception. These special blocks are for my documentation. And in them, I can use special XML syntax, special XML nodes. Everything just follows XML syntax in here to define certain properties of my documentation. The summary is the most straightforward one, just a description. What am I looking at? These other values have sometimes obvious meanings, sometimes not so obvious. Exception is, hey, this method can throw an exception, specifically an argument exception. And now I might want to, yes is less than 1. Give a description to when does this exception happen. If I look at my normal view, yeah, it's still looking the same. This is the very quick I'm hovering over it view. If I look at the more detailed window, you can see not only the exception name, but also my description for when this exception happens. You can also see this other part, params, where currently FPS is listed. Params, or param, the tag itself, refers to the arguments, the parameters of the method. That's why FPS is listed right now. Amount of frames the session should target. If I go back now and get the more detailed view, I get the description for my FPS argument. And I also get that description when I... When I use my IntelliSense to get information about what I'm expected to type into here. My IntelliSense will suggest, hey, I'm missing the FPS property or parameter, and it shows me FPS, the amount of frames the session should target. So these comments are immensely useful when I write this code here, because I get information about it straight away. Hey, this creates a new session. Okay, this method is known to cause this specific exception, an argument exception, in a very specific scenario where there's less than 1. And that is useful because now I know, hey, I have to be careful with this. I cannot provide values below 1. Without this, I might be tempted to just try it and see what happens, because does it just use a default value in that case? Does it default to 1? Does it work with less than 1 frame per second? Like maybe only 1 frame every 2 seconds, so 0.5 frames per second? I don't know. This exception tells me very clearly, hey, you provide anything less than 1, we're gonna have an exception. And so now I know, even without looking at the code, I know exactly I have to provide at least 1. And if I want to catch anything, I know I can catch argument exceptions because they definitely will be thrown by a create game instance. If I put in the wrong values, of course. We also have this other default addition here in returns. That is because I don't have a void method, but I'm returning a value. Session. It's just screenshot. That's the detail view I get now. So this is a static method, create game instance from this class, this namespace, which creates a new game session. It requires me to put in the amount of frames I want, and I get back a session. And I have to be careful because if I put in less than 1 frame per second, I'm getting an argument exception. A full description of what this is doing and how I use it. There are more tags we have, and there are more ways we can use the tags. Let's start here. Right now I'm hard-coding in FPS as less than 1. What if I change this? Maybe I'm just renaming it frames. Depending on what type of refactoring tools you have, it might actually recognize that this argument is used within this code explanation, this summary, this documentation comment, but maybe it's not. So FPS is still here. Something that helps these tools immensely is if you don't hardcode the name, so they don't have to guess, is this a reference to your parameter? Or is it just a word that's in here? We use a special XML node. And the one I'm using is paramref. No, there's one too many. Also, you can see summary and returns, for example. They start with a tag and end, so standard XML logic, but there are also some you can just have standing on their own. Both types happen and have their own unique reasons for existing. Now, with having frames specially marked as a parameter reference, tools will have less of an issue figuring out whether or not to rename this. And yeah, it's not picking up here. Let's put on the full name again. Yeah, okay, that doesn't pick up here, that's fine. That's one way we can reference the parameter. And it's basically the same as name of in your code. You would use paramref inside your summary comment, documentation comment. And there is one more reference tag we can add, reference node. Creates a new session, creates a new game session, creates a new... Instead of calling a new session, we can use something called C. Still a single standalone node. And C, we can now pass on the class name, for example. Again, it's basically a version of name of, just for documentation. And if we look at my code now, first the... Hello? No, that's not... I'm trying to get a screenshot, but it's now worked. Problem is it sometimes decides to remove this window when I hit my key combination. And as you can see, game is not written out in black like the rest of the text, is highlighted in blue. And I can actually hover over it. Actually, can I? Okay, that worked. If I hover over the game, it's like a hyperlink. I can click on that. And if I do click on that, I'm jumping straight to the class in my code. And let's have the detailed window as well. Same principle. I can see game is now highlighted in blue and there's an underscore. And here too, I can click on it. The difference with that is if I click on it here, I'm just getting the, okay, that's wrong window. Now it's picking up. It's just switching the content that's shown in the window, and I could hit the back button to go back. It's more like a browser window now. So it feels closer to hyperlinks in that case. I could do the same with argument exception, by the way. In that little preview, the argument exception also highlighted. I can click on it, and if I do that, we also jump to the code. Though I don't have the source code. I mean, I technically do have the source code, but it's not linked to this project, so Visual Studio doesn't know where to find it. And so it's just trying to decompile the code and show me that result, which is not the best, but sometimes that can actually be still useful. But if the system knows where to find the source code for a specific type or method or whatever, it will just straight up jump to that. Let's look at some more common tags. Oh yeah, right. Maybe important if you have a larger amount of text to write, you can add line breaks. So if I, for example, try not a new line. So let me write this out. I have not a new line, which is technically on a new line here, but nope. Let's try again. Now it worked. If we look at it now, you can see not a new line is kept on the same line as the rest, but new line will actually be placed on a new line because of this line break node. So that's how you can add some formatting. You have other useful stuff. You can have lists and I think tables. No, wait, table. I'm just thinking of HTML. But you definitely have things like list, the bullet, I think, and God, I haven't used them in a while. Is it just list? I cannot remember, to be honest. I can't remember the exact tag that is used. I don't use that feature often, but here's a screenshot. It's a bit like HTML at that point. So that's how you can put some more structuring in it, format things a bit nicer. But beyond that, there are some additional nodes that just provide general information, entirely different categories. One is remarks, and think of this as a standard comment just included in the documentation. Remarks is just, hey, here little gotchas or little nice to know or explanations. Things like, hey, this is based on this other code from our project from here, or this is using a special version of this algorithm and blah, 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 blah. Things nice to know. If we look at that now, and the standard view, you can see it with a bit of spacing, but otherwise it looks like it's just part of the description, though there's always an empty line in between. If we look at my more detailed view here, it is actually broken down as a separate category. To reiterate, this view is, in my case, through ReSharper, and there are many ways your tooling can read these special comments and present them to you. In theory, you could write your own stuff, I think. I mean, I know you can, because there are tools, let you write tools and whatnot. Just to show that the data can be separated, it's just XML data that can be evaluated in any way you want in the end. So remarks, sometimes quite useful for additional information that's not really describing what this method does, but might be useful if you want to use it effectively. Like things like, hey, this has a big performance impact if you do this and that, and maybe think of using this other thing. And when I say look at this other thing, I could include a C tag, so no, look at that, and let's look at program instead. So now it includes a link to program. Pretty cool. Maybe I don't want to link this in my remarks though, as a special, hey, this is one thing. Maybe you just want to have a more general link, and that could be useful if time span lay. We have, for example, an overload, which has slightly different way of working. Let's refactor this a bit. Less than or equal to 0 if delay, let's first delete this down here, if delay is less than or equal to time span 0, this needs positive delay. The amount of time each frame has. That should be enough. And I want to refer to this other overload I have, which uses the frames per second instead of the time it takes for each frame. And I can use another C, but specifically seealso. And then I could highlight create game instance. And now we have an interesting situation. The name create game instance is used twice in my code. It's used for this overload that accepts an integer, and this one that accepts a time span. So I use normal brackets in here and add the date, the data type. That lets me uniquely identify which overload I'm referring to. Let's quickly save. And if I look at the normal view, you can see I have an overload, plus one overload, but you don't see the seealso. So that's not included in here. If I go to the more detailed version, it's also not included. Why not? What's going on? What did I... Oh, okay, yeah, sorry, my bad, I forgot. I've only added it to the overload with the time span, but this is the overload with the integer. So I was looking at this summary up here, this documentation, which did not have the seealso. So again, the normal view does not include the seealso. If I look at the more detailed output, we actually have it as a hyperlink that I can click on to go to the other one. I could also use the seealso in here. So for the return value. And if I look at... No, not like that. Where was it? In the other overload. Yeah. I was adding this down here. Ended up there. That's better. Now if we look at the output for the advanced window, you notice that seealso contains my game reference down here that I can click on. It is no longer listed in my returns. It's just cut off the new nothing. No, that's not true. We go to the simplified view. Game is still in here. So different tools might evaluate the rules a bit differently. The simplified view sees this as, yeah, it's a reference that I wrote in here and it's just a reference. The more advanced view treats this as, nope, this doesn't belong in here. It's actually part of a special block for seealso. Ignore that in here. So different tools may have different rules and you have to check what your tool reacts to and how it behaves. There are also not just params, there's also special typeparam if you have a generic method. So like this, then you would include a special type for typeparam for that. That explains generic everything. For a list, this might refer to, hey, the type of the internally stored items. Stuff like that. Generic actually also has another consequence for us. We have to somehow denote that this is generic. And that works through curly brackets. So normal brackets help you identify a specific method by providing the data type it uses. But for generic methods, you have to include curly brackets to include the generic type arguments. So you have normal arguments and normal brackets, generic arguments and curly brackets. Let me think if I forgot anything important. There's still some formatting you can do. Like there's value and code, for example, that can change how something is rendered in the help view and maybe evaluated. Like you can have tooling that specially reacts to that and gives a different highlight. Or maybe some special function. Maybe you have checks that actually evaluate the documentation as part of making unit tests automated, something like that. I don't know, but you can. And I think in theory, there's no reason you wouldn't be able to add your own type of formatting in here. Just add your own XML nodes, like I can do my custom property. Now, the tooling I have will not react to that, but your program, if you make your own or have it, might be able to react to it, or might actually provide some of your own if you have existing tooling. So that's always not a possibility. Oh, this is the standard documentation comments. Again, there are comments. There are two slashes in front. The compiler will completely ignore this when you compile the code. It is just a comment. It's just a very fancy comment, which is intended to be evaluated by automated tools. And as I've shown you, one thing is you can look at your own code, which is convenient. Let's remove the type argument, or the generic thing. I should also fix this. This is referring to time span. So that's more correct. I have the method that accepts the integer, and it has seealso for the time span method. Now it's correct. I had a mistake there before. What you want to do with this is not just help your own code, maybe your own team if you're working on something, but you want to also be able to help other people that use your library. Or maybe you just don't want to share the source code with your team. You want to compile things beforehand, get a finished library, and then use that for your other projects. And there's a special setting we can use. Generate documentation file. Should be it. Now when I hit compile, should compile. It does. And now let's just, by default, we'll put it in the same output folder as your library. But you can change the path it's placed into. That's a separate value you can set in here. And let me just open this quickly. This is the file it generates. It has the same name as the DLL, but it's an XML file. And you can see the entire content here is just more formalized version of my summaries here. We have the context, which assembly are we talking about, which classes, which specific members. We have general description for the type, T. We have the property. We have a method, another method. And we have the different XML values we've just looked at listed out in a pure XML file. So even if you don't think you can program your way to read these comments out, if you're worried that, oh, that's too much stuff happening in a source code file, I'm not able to evaluate that. This is just an XML file. So you won't have any problems evaluating this if you want to use that for your own tooling. Might not be able to use that for your own code directly. Like if you're creating your source code and seeing it in the same project. But if you compile a library and include a documentation file, and create a documentation file and always put it next to your DLL and reference the DLL alongside this XML, then any other project will include this documentation and the standard tooling will show you this documentation in your code if you just highlight it or use shortcuts to get a more detailed view. And you will be able to just load the XML for your own tools that you can quickly write yourself. Just parse the XML and look for these well-defined names and you're good to go. This documentation can also be taken further if you have the tools for that. There are common tools out there that not simply generate an XML that contains the raw information, it will actually take that and format that nicely into, for example, an HTML file. And that collectively for an entire project, for everything in there. And that's how you get very quickly a reasonable documentation for your code. As long as you write good summaries here and add everything about that method, what this needs, what it reacts to, anything to look out for, nice to knows. As long as you include everything, you can have the system automatically generate a full documentation file from it, and you can share that with people, even online. So look out for any documentation you see that has similar style to this, where you have these very distinct categories that describe different things about a class or method. There's a good chance they had those generated automatically based on stuff that's just written as comments in your source code. And that's all for today. Yeah, 1 hour. I figured as much. But I'm gonna go now, try to rest a bit. And you have a lovely Sunday, or rest of it. See you next time.